Okay, hello everybody. My name is Carolyn Young, and welcome to the webinar, Your Standards, Your Say. This is our first time doing a webinar with the Organic Council of Ontario, and I also wanted to acknowledge that the Canadian Organic Growers are the co-hosts on our webinars going forward. So just before we get started, I want to remind you, make sure you are on mute and that your video is closed. I can do that for you, but if I do it for you, then you won't be able to unmute yourself. So please make sure that there's no video or mute or audio on, so that we can clearly hear our presenters. I also wanted to mention that we will have an question and answer period. And in that period, we'll ask you to chat your questions, and we may call on you to actually speak. That's it's up to you if you're willing to do that. So if you send us a question, just say, "I'd like the microphone," and we'll allow you to speak, and that will be at the end of the webinar. So there is a little chat icon, that is a little bubble that you can use to send your questions in. And feel free to send your questions at any time. There'll be somebody monitoring that. Also, I wanted to let everybody know that we will be recording the call. Okay. So let me just quickly introduce, I'm going to stop all of the videos that are not this. Okay, so let me just quickly introduce our panelists and presenters. Nicole Boudreau, do you want to wave, Nicole? Is coordinator for the Organic Federation of Canada, and also very much in charge of the process of consulting with industry and the standards. Also, I wanted to introduce Rob Walbridge, who is a board member of the Organic Council of Ontario and also sits on the Standards Interpretation Committee. I'll go into more details about each of our presenters later. And finally, Simon Jacques, who is a producer, also works for EcoCert Canada, and sits on the OCO board, and is our representative for the Organic Federation of Canada, and our technical committee representative, and has a vote there. So just quickly to go over the agenda, you can move your window of videos around so that you can see everything. We'll go over a quick overview of how the Canadian organic regime and standards work, why it's important to review our standards, an overview of the review process and how to make a petition, as well as which petitions have been raised already. And we'll have a Q&A with all the experts on our panel. Then, of course, we'll have a moment where people can open up issues that they would like to see raised that OCO could put in for them. We're not here to debate any issues. We are just opening this for people to offer their opinions on areas of the standard that could be amended. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Simon briefly to go over the Canadian organic regime and standards.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Simon. I am the Ontario representative on the Organic Federation of Canada, a board member of both. And I'm going to talk briefly about the whole standard and regulation process. So as you can see on the slide, in Canada, unlike our other trading partners, we have separated the standards from the regulation. So we're talking about two different documents here. The regulations that are currently in effect are the Canada Organic Products Regulation. Those are being replaced with Part 13 of the Safe Foods for Canadians regulation. Those will come into effect on January 15th of next year. there's no real change. The only significant change from the old organic products regulation to the Safe Food for Canadians regulation is the inclusion of aquaculture, a new organic standard, 32312, that is now referenced or will be referenced in the new regulation. Other than that, everything stays the same. What we're talking about now is a review of the Canadian Organic Standard 3210 and 3211, not the aquaculture standard. So we're only proposing changes to the crop and livestock production and maple. I guess the benefit, one could say, of separating out the regulation from the standard is that the CFIA does not control what the organic standard says. The organic standards are created by us, the organic industry, and it's a democratic process. We propose members for the technical committee, and the technical committee votes, and if they vote to adopt a proposed change, then it gets adopted. So that's why we are here in gathering your support. Everyone's comments can be submitted for proposal, and they will all be voted on. So currently, the regulations consist of basically a very simple document that says any product marketed as organic in Canada shall be certified to the Canadian Organic Standard. And there's input from the Standards Interpretation Committee. This slide kind of shows it as really top down, but anybody can ask a question to the Standards Interpretation Committee, an operator, a certifying body, a CVB, they can all send questions to the Standards Interpretation Committee, and their answers are distributed simultaneously to everybody through the Organic Federation of Canada website. So what we're proposing to do here is update the Canadian Organic Standard. It's a process that's administered by the Canadian General Standards Board. Canadian General Standards Board is a Crown corporation. While they technically own the copyright on the organic standard, they don't control what the standard says. They only administer the process by which we update it. Okay, I think that's it for that slide. And I'll speak to this as well, Carolyn.
Yeah.
So again, like I said, the Canadian Organic Standard is referenced by the regulation. They describe what needs to happen in order for a food product to be certified organic. It sets out the requirements for certification bodies, an accreditation procedure. The CFIA doesn't directly accredit certifying bodies. They do it through accreditors. And like I said, that's different from how it is in the US. The downside of that is that given that the CFIA does not control the standard, they also don't fund its maintenance and revision. So whereas in the US and in Europe, for instance, there's an ongoing process with ongoing stable funding, and their standards can be updated at any point. Whenever anyone decides there needs to be an update, that can be done. Here, to do an update, we need to solicit funds and go through a whole fundraising procedure. And the last time a full update happened, it was published in 2015. There have been small modifications since then, but the last full revision was in 2015. Okay, next slide.
I think this is going to be Rob to speak to this.
Sure.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So why do the standards need to be updated? As Simon mentioned already, it's a process that's mandated by the Canadian General Standards Board. It has to be completed every 5 years, or else the standard are what they term archived. So they're no longer deemed a active standard. And obviously that could have impacts in terms of our trading arrangements. The regulation can still technically reference an archive standard, but it obviously doesn't reflect well on the Canadian organic sector. and could cause potential issues with our trading partners. Obviously, the standard itself needs to be updated to remain relevant and reflect developments in the industry. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about why to make a proposal. But essentially, having a current standard helps keep it up to date and helps promote the growth of the organic sector.
So, Nicole, can you speak to it, the funding?
Yes, the industry bodies conducting review process must source funding. As Simon and Rob explained, because the standard, the content of the standard is under the responsibility of the industry. So far, the Canadian government has required or requested that the industry would source funding to conduct a review of the organic standard. So there are two, just before we go on, there are really two main steps in the review, in the process of the review. The first step of the review is the step of the industry consultations. When we launch a review, we first consult the sector, the stakeholders, and the producers or operators. We ask them what is unclear, what needs to be clarified. Are there new practices or new techniques that you would have to see in the organic standard that are always complying with organic principles for sure? But so this first phase of the review is what we call the industry consultation. And so we call for petitions, as we will explain later, and then we create working groups. Each working group, we create a crop working group, a livestock working group, a maple working group, a sprout working group, because agriculture is so large. And these working groups will analyze all the petitions that are submitted and will make recommendations. So you can see how this is important, and these recommendations will go up to be analyzed by the committee, the voting members of the Committee on Organic Agriculture. So this process, the industry consultation process, we still are waiting for the confirmation of the funding, because the Organic Federation of Canada applied under an Agriculture Canada program called the CAAP. We have a good application of $400,000 because we need money to manage the process, to pay the conveners of the working groups, to look for expertise, make research, and prepare all the recommendations that will be presented at the technical committee, at the committee on organic agriculture. The other part of the review is once, as you can understand, once all the working group recommendations are ready, we step up to the CGSB process itself. So the Committee on Organic Agriculture meets and they listen to all the recommendations that are proposed. Everything has to be translated. It is in person. We need an in-person meeting to have proper discussion. And then there is a ballot, a public consultation. So all this process at the CGSB level are funded by Agriculture Canada for this review. So in January, Minister McCauley was in Guelph to announce that AFC would allocate $250,000 to cover the service fee for the CGSB. The CGSB is a Crown corporation, as Simon explained, but it is based on the cost recovery system, so they need to be paid. So we have the funding from AFC for the CGSB service fee, but we are awaiting the final confirmation, the final approval of the proposal that we submitted under the CAAP program.
Okay, so do you want to just explain how the standards review works, or do you want?
Yeah, because I was more or less already explaining that. The OFC manages, is very much involved. With CGSB, we cooperate very closely with CGSB to conduct the review. So just to talk about the CGSB Committee on Organic Agriculture, if you open your standard, you will see on page 3 or 4 of the Organic Principles the list of all the voting members of the Committee on Organic Agriculture. Usually the voting members are associations. Nobody is there for their private interest. All the members are representatives from organic associations across the country. And then, as I said, we are currently accepting proposals for modifications. And then this will be reviewed by the working groups who will make the recommendations. And then, as I explained previously, the CGSB committee will vote and distribute the revised draft for public comment. So all this work has to be completed in November 2020. We are still in 2018, but this process is long because it has to be transparent. This is based on consultation. So it's the reason why we are very active now in this in the review process.
So Rob, can you explain why people might make a proposal?
Yeah. So there are several reasons why we basically need to go back and revisit the standard every 5 years. Often, as farmers and processors are using the standard, and as certification bodies and inspectors are attempting to apply the standard, there are ambiguities of meaning or conflicting information that comes up. Those types of questions are often referred to the Standards Interpretation Committee to try and tease out the original intent of the standard, but there still remain issues that need to be addressed by the Technical Committee during the review process. So that comes up often with conflicts between things that are stated in the permitted substances list and then what appears in the actual management standards. That's one of the most common sources of ambiguities. Obviously, agriculture evolves over time as well, and so we see new technologies and new tools come into play that that weren't a factor back in 2015. So we're talking about things like vertical farming or growth chambers that rely solely on artificial light. Even things as simple as the Japanese paper pot transplanter, they raise issues of, well, are they permitted or not? There are sometimes discrepancies that come up between the Canadian and the USDA or EU standards as well that need to be addressed during the process. And there are ongoing issues that the industry grapples with. Parallel production is a great example of that sort of issue that we've grappled with that during every review process. And again, as the industry evolves, we need to revisit those concerns. And then finally, over the past year, the Organic Product Regulation was folded into the new Safe Food for Canadians Act. And so that changes some of the references and cross-references between different regulations. And so the standard needs to address things like that as well. And so obviously aquaponics and aquaculture are big factors there. I think that's what covers it.
Sorry, I'm just bringing up another PowerPoint. So Nicole, we're going to go through the questions. I just need to bring them up quickly, okay? So. Okay. Okay, so here's the form, and maybe I'll just bring it to the first slide. So this is obviously your contact information. The next section, do you want to just explain this briefly, what this means, Rob or Nicole?
Yeah, if I may. So it is very simple. The form, you have to use a form because, you know, when so many people are submitting petitions, if we don't have a form, that will be hard to compile everything. So the first section, as you saw before, is just the contact people, your contact, because sometimes when you fill a form, though it is well prepared, sometimes we go back to you to ask you more information or more clarification because we really want to address your proposal in the best manner. So now what you see on the screen is okay, the standard section number that you want to modify, and then you see the description of the issue, background information and references. So you simply explain why this clause, this existing clause, or a new clause that you would propose. What is the issue that it is helping, and what is the background information and references, because when you present an issue, you will be a lot more successful if you present background information and references. We do extra research and we look for extra background information when we receive petitions because sometimes we need to do that, but it's very great if your basic petition has credible information. Next page, please. And then the proposed change. This is sometimes challenging. We like it very much when you take the clause as it is in the 2015 version of the standard, and when you write what the clause, how the clause would be worded. So it's the reason why we write include proposed wording. How should it be written, or what is the revision that you propose to the clause? Maybe you can erase some words. Sometimes just changing a comma would change the sense of the clause. So we ask you, if your proposed wording is not perfect, it's fine. You don't need to, it's not a PhD thesis, but it's very convenient to have a proposed wording. And then the rational justification for the proposed change that you want to have. So finally on the form, you explain what the issue is, you propose a change, and you explain why this change would be welcome. So you can access, I think probably that OCO has the forms that you can download on OCO website, on the website of the Organic Federation of Canada. Also, you can just click and download the forms. It is a simple Word form. We really prefer that you write in Word, you type in Word. We receive sometimes handwritten forms that are scanned. It's more difficult for us to copy paste and to work with it. So the Word is perfect. No PDF. You don't need to save it on the PDF. We will respect your form. We won't change your petition, and because it's easier for us to manage documents. Management of documents takes a lot of time in the revision process.
Okay. So now
Go ahead. Sorry, Carolyn, can I just give like a specific example of what Nicole's talking about there?
Sure.
So, for instance, if you go back to the previous slide, right, so let's say you'd like to propose that parallel production be allowed. What they would love to see would be cut and paste right into proposed change the existing section of the standard that prohibits parallel production, and then below it, your exact proposal of how you would change the standard. So it could even be just delete this section altogether, or if you'd like to keep the existing section of the standard and just change the wording, put that in there with your proposals. I think that would be the easiest for the committee to grapple with.
Okay, so now I'm just going to pull up for Nicole. Actually, just before, so we will be sending a follow-up email to everybody with all of the links to the forms, as well as any thoughts on that you would like OCO to be thinking about as well. The Organic Council, we can't actually propose all of the amendments that people come to us with, but if there is a strong consensus on one side or the other that OCO would like to be able to offer feedback and input to the committee. So we'll send those forms around for sure, and we also will be reminding people about a few things in that email. So one of the things that I just wanted to remind people that is, we have a Representative Simon on our board, and so we see it as our role to engage Ontario stakeholders in this process. For those people who don't have the time or the resources to put in their own petition, while we might not put in a petition for everything by the end of July, we do want to hear from people, and we want to keep the issues that you're having with the certification process on our radar, so that even if it's not through the standards process, that we can always be working to continuously improve the organic certification process. It's part of our role. And we do have on our website a specific contact form about standard related issues.
Carolina, I would add that when you write you don't have to go through an association to submit a petition. I think OCO is offering a great help, but we welcome petitions from everyone. Should it be a big, huge marketing board or a simple producer? Also, about confidentiality, when the working groups are meeting to analyze the petitions, they see who you are, but it stops there. When we prepare the recommendation up to the voting members of the Committee on Organic Agriculture, we don't see your name or your identity.
Okay, that's really good to know. Thank you. Just before we get into a little bit more of the details, so Nicole's going to share with you some of the petitions that OFC has received so far. But before we go into that, I wanted to remind people that while the standards are very, very important, in Ontario, they still are not regulated. So the standards that, the organic standards obviously are regulated by the Organic Products Regulations, which are under the Agricultural Products Act. I believe it's a national act, and that act only refers to products that are traded between provinces or cross borders internationally. So and any product that uses the Canada Organic logo also is regulated by those regulations. However, the use of the word organic in Ontario, it's completely voluntary that operators have to certify. And this is an ongoing problem that the Organic Council has been advocating on. So we've been, we do invite all of you who are interested in potentially attending the Queen's Park Day we're holding on September 11th in Toronto at Queen's Park. If you'd like to know more about it, we'll be sending a link to that. Okay. So what types of proposals have been received so far? So just bear with me for one moment and I'll bring up the PDF. Right. So Nicole has been generous enough to share with us some of the petitions that have been received so far. And I'm going to turn myself on mute, but I will scroll for you, Nicole.
Yeah, so it is a brief list. So far we have around 65 petitions. You'll see some of them. It's not all. We are awaiting a lot of others because our deadline is July 31st. I know that So anyway, so if you look, for example, at the definitions, the update definition of genetic engineering, as you know, genetic engineering is evolving. There are so many new techniques that are introduced in manipulation of genes, so it needs to be clarified. Also, the definition of visually distinguishable. It is a question that we have received at the Standards Interpretation Committee. Many of these petitions come from the Standards Interpretation Committee, because Interpretation Committee being there to try to help producers and CFIA and NCBs to understand clearly what clauses are. It was natural for the SIC, the Standards Interpretation Committee, to submit petitions. And I would remind you that Rob here on the call is a member of the Standards Interpretation Committee, so he knows them all. About the organic plan, there was a request to add to talk about the issue of the traceability of organic inputs. On crop production, always the same old debate about parallel production, about treated post, I think for the last 15 years, to all the discussions that we have witnessed about the costs, the revision of the standard, parallel production and treated post have already been there. Add planting stocks to 5.3, it is a simple adding. And or prohibit manure from non-organic farms. It is a sensitive issue because it's hard sometimes to find enough manure from organic farms. So, but anyway, a stakeholder would like the standard to prohibit manure from non-organic farms. Livestock production, so you have at 6231 just a simple change of wording, so it's easy. Or 6232 clarify conversion of animals from outside operation, or clarify transition for poultry. Remind mandatory testing of drinking water every year. Allow toe treatment. We received dramatic pictures with about toes and in this petition. Add materials for bedding. Actually, there are not many substances in the list of materials allowed for bedding, so it needs to be updated. Or 677, okay, treated post is addressed in crop production, but not in livestock, so there would be a need to specify how treated post could be used in livestock production. Allow electric trainers. There was a huge debate in the last review about this. I think the intention was to prohibit electric trainers, but there is opposition to this. Or allow electric crowd gates in milk parlor. So it would be interesting to talk about this. In apiculture, clarify confusion about hives and colonies, because when the Interpretation Committee has discussed extensively about honey production, because what is a hive, what is a colony, and if does a clause apply to the hive or to the colony, so it needs to be clarified. In maple production, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petitions. If I don't know if in Ontario is not a big maple producer, but we have like to prohibit magnetism for the treatment of the sap or revised number of taps per tree diameter. Add fuel options for evaporation. Actually, in the standard, it's only wood and diesel, I believe. So now they don't even add electricity for fuel option or heating options, excuse me. Allow caustic soap or modified vinegar in replace with acetic acid. So it is really an editorial change proposal about sprout, shoot, and microgreens. Clarify types of containers, clarify soil requirement, because microgreens, greenhouse, you know, there is a confusion here, or application of 7415 for cleaning, because of the it comes from SIC. I forgot to remove the SIC question 303. It's about what can be used for the cleaning of the sprout and the seeds. I believe I have to check back. Greenhouse crops. Modify title to include. Whoop, there is a mistake here. Containerized crops. allow hydroponics. It is back because now we have aquaponics that is allowed under organic production systems in the aquaculture standard, and because agriculture standard prohibits hydroponics, it will be a big discussion. And then allow artificial, another English mistake, sorry, allow artificial lighting as only source of light in indoor greenhouse. As Rob was mentioning, it is about vertical farming and growth chambers. But actually, you cannot just have artificial lighting as your source of light in greenhouses. About wild crops, well, isolation of wild crops, it needs to be more clearer. Now we have another list of petitions with permitted substances list, such as if blood meal, there was a lot of questions about how it is sterilized, and so there is a proposal to just require commercial sources because the sterilization process is more guaranteed, if I would say. Or speak about calcium, repeated application of I don't see it all. Repeated application of any form of calcium increasing the soil salt content is not acceptable. Have precisions about compost feedstocks, about documentation that is required when it for any feedstocks. The mine minerals unprocessed and potassium, there was big debates about the ion exchange process in the manufacturing of these. So it is back to the table. Then zinc, add use of zinc carbonate to the list of the zinc substances. Crop production aids and materials to allow D-limonene. It comes from lemon, I believe. Mulches, add other potential submaterials for the composition of mulches. Surfactants, remove soap from the annotation because soap finally would be strictly synthetic. We will discuss about that. Lignin sulfonates, add sodium lignin. Seed cleaning and sanitation, there is confusion about what substances can be used for seed cleaning and sanitation. Table 5.2, feed additives and feed supplement. Harmonize additives, additives for feed with allowed additives for humans. It is interesting because it is more restrictive. Additives for feed, there are more restrictions on additives for feed than there are for additives for humans. Diatomaceous earth, allow diatomaceous earth to diet, add diatomaceous earth to diet, and hair silage preservation products, add sodium hydroxide as preservation product. Table 5.3, amino acids, allow, excuse me for English, I typed this very rapidly yesterday, synthetic lysine, that will be a tough discussion to allow synthetic lysine for poultry and pork. Citric acid that would be used as a production aid to reduce odors, or propionic, formic, and acetic acids allowed as pH regulators. If non-synthetic is not available, yeah. Where were we? Yeah, and a few others such as glycol ether PM, add as formulant for products used for food bath. Lanolin, add lanolin as ointment. Sodium polyacrylate for hygiene powder, to add this for hygiene powder. And plant oils, allow synthetic thyme oil for food bath. There will be it's not there, but the definition of synthetic, non-synthetic will be very scrutinized and revised because it lacks clarity for now. Now, table 6.4, 6.5, 7.3, 7.4, it is about ingredients, processing aids, so it ends the list. Which one? Table 4. If you go at table 4, for egg cleaning, we had a difficult discussion at the SIC about that because the industry would like to use substances or 7.4 for egg cleaning. So big discussions to have. So it is a short list, not including everything.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Nicole. I'm sure that there are a lot of questions that have come out of that. It's a very detailed list, but there are some big topics that I think will arise from that discussion. So basically, now we would like to allow all of the participants in the webinar to ask clarifying questions. So specifically, we'd like to hear if you have any questions about the process of submitting a petition and how decisions will be made. And furthermore, we will take any questions that people have about the standards and the standards review process and potential areas that they would like to see addressed. But we don't want to get into too many debates. So please use a filter when you want to make a comment or a question, that we will have further discussion on more contentious topics at a later time. So just to mention before we get into the question and answers, OCO is hoping to host a whole series of webinars where we can discuss some of these more contentious topics. And we would be inviting panelists from the industry to provide their viewpoints. So some of the topics we're talking about hosting webinars are on our this issue of aquaponics and hydroponics, especially since the new aquaculture standard includes aquaponics. What does that mean for our organic standards now? The issue of parallel production and transition, just trying to give people a little bit more context for why this comes up as an issue within the standards. While inputs is, it did come up as an issue that was mentioned in your list a little bit. We know that there is an issue in general with inputs being approved, and we might bring this up in the context of the standards review, although it may not be addressed in the standards review per se. Again, same thing with small scale certification. Is there a way for this to be addressed in the standards? That's questionable, but it is a good time to talk about it. Greenhouse and container grown, we want to talk about livestock, access to outdoors and feeds. Lysine was one of them, for example. And then we also were considering tackling some expansion of scope questions. So as many of you know, the Canadian Organic Standards only deal in feed and food, but not necessarily textiles, body care, home cleaning supplies, cannabis, Christmas trees, all of those things. So we did want to address some of those questions in these webinars as well. If you are interested in suggesting a webinar topic or potentially sponsoring a webinar so that we can make sure that we have the cash flow and capacity to make it happen, I would love to chat with you some more. Yeah.
Caroline, I would also add something. If when you saw the list of all the petitions, join a working group. If you want to have your say, you can send an email to Caroline or to info@Organic Federation of Canada. The working groups are meeting by conference call. We share documents on Google Doc. It's easy. And then you participate to the discussion and you help making a recommendation. We need you to populate the working groups, and it is interesting, and it's not usually a lot of time, and we invite you to join.
Thanks, Nicole. Yes, and we have heard from a few people who are interested in joining a working group, so that's great. So, sorry, before we go to this, we are going to open up the floor to questions. Like I mentioned before, if you can chat your question first, and then we can actually unmute you so you can say what you would like to say. Either raise your hand or send a chat in. And I'm just going to bring up a sheet where we'll be writing those questions and answers in. So stop. There's one coming in, I think, now. Sorry. No, I can see it, but I will, hold on, sorry. So here we go. We have some of the questions that are coming up. So I think this is from Ruth. Ruth, would you like me to, I'm going to give you the ability to speak. So Ruth, I think we can hear you now. Do you want to introduce yourself and explain your question?
Can you hear me? It's Ruth Knight.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so just in terms of the leading principles of organic, based from the International Federation of Organic, they're accepted as the leading principles of what is defined as organic. It defines organic as an industry apart from many other industries, and I'm just asking how those principles are reviewed or balanced in terms of other rationale that's provided in terms of proposed changes.
Okay, Nicole, do you want to answer?
Yeah. When we review the principles, we will have a working group that will be responsible for the comparison of the Codex Alimentarius principle, EU principles, IFOAM principles, and US principles. It is, so we will have a working group whose mandate will be to look at all international standards from associations or from other jurisdictions, because it is very important for the Canadian standards to be comparable. It is adapted to the Canadian conditions and philosophy at some point, but to facilitate trade and to ensure that our organic standards are comparable to the other international standards. We will have a working group that will constantly analyze what the proposed modifications are. Are they balanced with other standards or not? Would it create a variance between the Canadian standard and the standards of another country, so that trade between Canada and this other country would be impeded because there would be too much differences? So it's how we'll see. We have the funding for this working group, and that will be a major part of the work.
Does that answer your question, Ruth, or did you have something else in mind?
No, you're not going to debate any particular changes, but that's a good response. Thank you.
We debate changes. In Canada, we have variances with standards from other countries. If we would go to each single variations between the standards, the Canadian and other countries' standards, there would be a lot of variances. But at some point, we have also to be flexible, like the use of inputs. There are many inputs that are used in other, like in the US, that we cannot use in the Canada or vice versa, but we don't put a variance to impede trade. We just go with the major things. Otherwise, that would be very complicated.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
It's just a clarification of what Nicole said, that all the working groups presumably will be instructed to evaluate all proposals against the historic organic principles described in Annex B of the current standard. And then the technical committee, when voting on proposed changes, will also be instructed to evaluate proposed changes against the historic organic principles described in Annex B. Would you say that's correct, Nicole?
Yeah.
Nicole, or I would ask any of the panelists. So I'm still waiting for questions here, but I have a lot of questions that I'd like to ask. One is, can you describe what the historical, how the CJSB technical committee has been created thus far? So how were the members chosen in the past, and have they changed much since the initial standard was created?
Well, Caroline, if you like reading policies and manuals, I will send you the CGSB Policies and Procedures Manual. It's very interesting. If you want to fall asleep when you have insomnia, it's great, but I'm joking a little. The CGSB is a standard development organization. As being a standard development organization, they have to abide by international ISO standardization standards. So there are international standards about how to create a standard. So the CGSB has this accreditation by the Standards Council of Canada, and the Standards Council of Canada plays a role on the international scene. So in this policy and procedure, you have the description of what a voting member, a technical committee, what should be its composition. It has to have producers, it has to have users, consumers, legislators. So there is a description of on how to have a balanced voting committee. So we have to abide by that. So we negotiate with them sometimes if a specific group would like to join the working group, join the list, the voting, the CGSB committee, excuse me, then they will make sure that it doesn't create an unbalance between producers, consumers, users, legislators, or whatever. It is in the late 90s that the sector decided to go under the CGSB process, because if you want your standard to be referenced by law, to be credible, to be a national standard, the organic standard is called a national standard because it is reviewed under international standardization policy systems. And so this was a decision. I think the sector was not so well aware of in the late 90s. It was new, and it's normal. What would be the consequences of working with CGSB? But these consequences became clearer when the organic product regulations were enforced in 2009. That would decide that the standards would be referenced by the regulations. They would not be embedded and part of the regulations. And so the tricky part is that the sector has to decide what the content is, but the standard is owned by CGSB. The intellectual property is owned by CGSB. It's a bit tricky, but it's the way it is. And CGSB, as I said, is a cost recovery agency, and we have to pay to. Their fee is $1,400 per day, and for their staff. Plus, when we will have an in-person meeting, we will need a meeting room and simultaneous translation, and bilingualism is very expensive. So yeah, so for now, CGSB owns the IP, the intellectual property. The sector has to decide about the content based on CGSB procedures, and it came from decisions that were made in the late 90s.
Thanks. I'm still not seeing any questions, which is very surprising, because I would think there would be lots of questions here. But I have another question that I think probably a lot of people are wondering, which is, now that the Safe Food for Canadians regulations are coming into play, what bearing does that have on how the standards are regulated, if any? Is it basically?
It's the same thing.
The same thing. Okay.
It won't change. If the Canadian Organic Standards will remain national standards, if they are not, if we don't want the standards to be archived, as Rob explained, it's the same process. The standards maintenance is on the CGSB. The standards are referenced by the Safe Food for Regulations, the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, excuse me. It's the same thing about the standard maintenance.
So, okay, I have two other questions. Since I'm not hearing from anybody else, I'll just ask them. And yeah, feel free, anyone who's participating, to let us know if you have a question or you have a comment that you'd like to make. One question is, there are lots of questions that we get, at least at the Organic Council of Ontario, about the certification system. So for example, the other day, I heard from somebody who I think is on this call about the fact that certificates don't expire. And the issue there being, if one certificate from previous years has one product and the certificate from this year doesn't, there's some confusion there, for example. So that's just an example. We don't need to get into the details of that. But for questions like that have to do more with the certification system, does that fit into this process? And if it doesn't, where do people bring those issues up? Maybe I'll let somebody else respond. Simon?
Sure. I would say it definitely does not apply to this process of reviewing the standard. From the beginning, we had the technical committee, or perhaps maybe you say the CGSB, has been asked to remove any references to certification from this standard, with the possible exception of informative notes. So it doesn't apply here. I would say if people have concerns about how the standard is enforced and like the nature of certificates, whether they expire or not, those concerns should be brought directly to the CFIA, because they would be addressed through changes to the CFIA's operating manual, where the CFIA produces a manual that they distribute to the certification bodies, and that they can update that manual at any time, so they can change. In fact, that brings up some, if I want to go back to your last question about does the Safe Food for Canadians regs change anything? I was at a conference last weekend, and someone was talking about the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, and one of the changes he said that this regulation brings forward, not specifically for organics, but in general, is an increased focus or emphasis on risk-based inspections, and which he saw as a significant change. So, for instance, when in cases where the CFIA is responsible for inspecting and enforcing aspects of the regulation, they're moving towards more of a risk-based assessment. So they will do a risk analysis of all of their potential operators, and the frequency of inspections, for instance, or the nature of their inspections will change depending on their assessment of risk. And so, given that that's been incorporated in the regs, I would think that opens the door for changes to the way that organic inspections happen. That won't be the case unless a change is made to the operating manual, but I think it opens up that possibility.
Interesting.
Which may address the small scale issue potentially.
Potentially, yeah. It could address the small scale issue.
But I would comment that small scale certification is usually for local production, and local production is really usually under intra-provincial regs. So the Safe Food doesn't apply to local production. It applies to products that are sold from one province to the other, or imported, exported. So small scale is more about if Ontario someday gets an internal organic regulation.
Right, and actually we've been doing quite a bit of research on the options as a result. So if we do have a webinar on this issue, we hope to, we will be sharing our results on that. We had a survey this past year. We'll be sharing those soon with our members, but also hopefully in a webinar about that.
Yeah, in the last review, there was a working group with small scale. I can send you, it was run by, what was his name? I don't remember. A Guelph farmer from Guelph. What
Tony?
was he? Huh?
Tony McQuail?
I don't remember his name. Anyway, he produced a report. I can share with you the report
I'm pretty sure.
from this working group.
There's another question here from our staff and interns at OCO. We're just doing all the questioning. Participants aren't bringing up any questions, but I think it's a fair question to ask. And you and I have had this conversation already, but it's about the expansion of scope. So there is a question here about if expanding the scope of the Canadian Organic Standards, for example, including body care or cannabis in the standard, is not part of the process of reviewing the standard, how does it get changed? How do we expand the scope if that's something that we want to do?
The scope would be changed by CFIA, not by the standard. Because even if you grow cannabis, you have to follow organic principles and do some research on the best fertilizing recipe, but you are still limited to the inputs on the substances, the permitted substances list. So the same with body care. It would be, I suppose, on the processing, the preparation of products. It is really, the scope is really about the regulations. It's more than about the standards.
So let's say, because this probably will arise actually in the coming years, that a marijuana or cannabis producer claims that their product is organic and that they're following the organic principles. Would that go to the Standards Interpretation Committee? And it wouldn't even touch the certification system. It would just
No, because the interpretation committee is funded by the CFIA. CFIA will not accept us to spend hours talking about cannabis because they don't cover it. But as Simon already said yesterday, I believe in a conversation, there could be a voluntary certification. So for example, EcoCert could decide to certify it under a private label organic cannabis. Like
Yeah,
it's actually the case with organic aquaculture products.
Yeah. So in the case of, are you hearing me? Yeah.
Yes.
Expanding the scope, for instance, to cannabis or body care would require even more than just an update to the manual. It would require an actual modification of the regulation. And for instance, I think applying it to soap would probably even require, it wouldn't even be possible under the Safe Food for Canadians Act, since it's called the Safe Food for Canadians Act. The regulations are all pursuant to that act. And so I don't see a possibility of expanding the scope to medical products or body care products under the current regulation. I think to do that would involve proposing a new regulation under whatever act regulates cannabis or body care. So that could be done by introducing or proposing a new federal regulation, or it could be done province by province. So for instance, in our proposed Ontario organic regulation, we could propose that it be implemented under an act that would allow for it to encompass cannabis or soap.
But I would also say that you have the Competition Bureau. You cannot, even should it be about agriculture or any other products, you cannot do false publicity. So if you would see an organic claim for organic cannabis or whatever, you could require an inquiry to a government agency taking care of false publicity issues to investigate to know if it makes sense, this organic claim.
Okay, so we have a question from our participants, which I was anticipating actually. I'm going to offer, it's Ian Ritchie, I believe. I'm going to unmute you if Ian, did you want to speak to your question?
Yeah, can you guys all hear me?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. No, this, and I don't want to get into debate here because that's not the point of it. But we have our own beliefs on what the organic standard is moving forward, and there are a number of proposed amendments, specifically hydroponic, which goes contrary to what we believe in. And so I'm just wondering how we get more involved in the process and more engaged to make sure our voice is heard and acknowledged at the same time. Because in this instance, for example, we don't believe and agree with it.
Yeah, first of all, you have to join the Greenhouse Working Group, and also there will be once the review will be launched, CGSB will circulate a revised a proposed new draft, and that will be submitted to public consultation. So, and then anybody will be able to issue to comment. But the working group is the first place, and then the public consultation that will be led by CGSB about these changes. The OFC was very much opposed to introduction of aquaponics for terrestrial plants. We thought until until the publication of the Safe Food Act that CFIA would not allow terrestrial plants grown in aquaponic systems labeled as organic. But finally, CFIA, I suppose there was a strong lobby. They are now accepting that, for example, if you buy lettuce, it could be lettuce grown under aquaponic system can be labeled as organic. So probably that the agriculture sector will have to decide if we maintain a prohibition of hydroponics. Do we put a clause inside the agriculture standard that aquaponics would be eligible? And also about aquaponics, for many people it is just hydroponics with fishes swimming under. But now we are trying to push as to have, if an operator pretends that he sells aquaponic lettuce, that he also sells organic fish. Because what is aquaponics? If you can decide to have salad growing or lettuce, whatever, growing on the surface of the water, but have some fishes swimming under, and you would call it aquaponics, it would be hydroponics. Because in aquaponics, it's really the feces from the fishes that are the main fertilizing ingredient for the vegetables. So it will raise a lot of discussions. But for now, we are imposed aquaponics, terrestrial plants grown in aquaponic systems. We are imposed that by CFIA and the Safe Food Act. So we have to deal with this.
And so just as a follow-up question so that people understand, currently we have basically the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, so getting a clause already, has made it so that both the aquaculture standard and the organic standard are legitimately regulated underneath that. And if there is contradiction between those two standards, they have written a page that says that the aquaculture standard, which includes aquaponics underneath it, and that those plants grown in aquaponic systems can be called organic, that's okay. So there's contradiction between those two standards. Can you just help us understand if there is a difference between, if there's variance between two standards, can that be amended later on, or is it simply like who makes the final decision on that? And
it can always be amended. Yeah. If there is, the aquaculture standard has to be revised every 5 years, as the agriculture standard is. But so at some point, if there is confusion, nobody's happy, or maybe that the aquaculture technical committee will decide that aquaponic systems are only good for aquatic plants, not terrestrial plants. But I know the guys. I know they are very active. They have pushed very, very hard. I would be surprised if they would withdraw this. On the other hand, I don't think personally that we will be flooded with a lot of aquaponic lettuce or broccoli. It is a very complicated production system. It is not easy to do, and as I said, we will insist on verifying that what vegetables, aquaponic vegetables, are really when there is aquaponic vegetables, there is organic fish behind. It's not just a facade. It's not just an illusion. So, and we were surprised because CFIE will have to manage this.
Right.
Yeah, can I comment on this?
Yes.
Nicole, is it your understanding that the Standards Interpretation Committee will be answering interpretation questions about the aquaculture standard?
Not yet. We have not received that mandate so far.
Is there a proposal to have a separate Standards Interpretation Committee for the aquaculture standard?
It was discussed by the time by DFO. I don't know yet what they will do. If they will maintain a separate, there will surely be an interpretation committee at some point, but it is not enforced for now. So it will happen after January 2019, I believe. If there are many questions and CFIE is confused, because the reason why we have an interpretation committee is that there are no organic expertise inside CFIE, and they don't want to develop it. So, because they have to oversee the CVBs and the CBs, and they have to arbitrate, to be referees in problems between CVBs, CBs, and operators, they pay us to manage the Standards Interpretation Committee. So, when they will see a lot of problems happening with aquaculture or aquaponics, CFIE will not have an aquaponic expert in their staff, so they will build the interpretation committee for aquaculture when trouble will happen. And they will most probably ask us if our system can be copied.
We're hoping to have a separate webinar on this. I know there's quite a few people on the in this issue, but I think that that's a really good point, that there needs to be some interpretation. And I believe that the CFIA on their webpage encourage people to, if and when they grow aquaponic greens or products that might compete with agricultural products, that they would specify that it is an aquaculture product. So
on the label, yeah.
Yeah. But I did want to follow up on that question, because I think there's a really important piece there that a lot of people would be interested to hear about, which is that, you know, when there's a strong push, let's say from large companies versus the whole of organic agriculture. So let's say there are specific operators who work within a value chain that's affected, and they're involved in the working group and they have a lot of sway. Who wins out in terms of the vote? Like, how does it play out in terms of, decisions being made in the long run? Obviously, there's a vote at the technical committee, and that's the final vote. And, there's an opportunity to give input once the standards have been drafted. But I'm curious if there's any sort of neutral arbiter in the case that there is sort of a stalemate on an issue.
Yeah, but the policy, the way the standard is revised and the policies and procedures of CGSB are built to prevent a push from a major player, for example. The only way that the voting could be, dishonest would be that a major player would pay voting members under the table, vote yes, vote yes. We have no control, but I'm joking a little, but the CGSB procedure, because they check the composition of the voting, committee. We all see the ballot when we are the working group. With the working group conveners, we can see what's coming in. When there are negative votes and comments from industry, we have to resolve negative votes and comments. So the process is long, is expensive, but the way it is built, it is specifically to prevent major push from a major player. But I don't know under the table what could happen.
Yeah,
if they gave me $1 million,
Yeah, that would be serious fraud, and I'm sure there's something in the CGSB procedures about, you know, prohibiting bribes and influence from. But I want to go back to what can the specific question of what can the general public do if they have concerns about proposals that have been submitted. I want to reiterate the importance of being aware of the draft and the comment period. So it's not just one vote from the technical committee and then it gets published. There will be a vote, a draft standard will be released, and there will be a public comment period. And perhaps that's another webinar we can do. When that happens, let's have another webinar and say, okay, here is the draft. Here are the changes that have been tentatively accepted or have been, and then everyone can give comment. If somehow the technical committee votes to allow hydroponics, for example, then there would be a draft standard published, which proposed allowing hydroponics, and a comment period. And that would be the time to send in your comment. I don't suspect that on that particular question that's likely, but that would be the time to address it.
But we have to be very, excuse me, we have to be very careful because under the last review, there were supposed to be 2 public comment periods, and the CGSB canceled the second one. And it's the reason why we suddenly had some clauses that were introduced in the standard without going under public consultation. So we will work very hard to hold CGSB to their calendar and to their procedures.
Yeah, I think it's important too to note the difference between the working groups and the technical committee. So the working groups are open, you know, you can volunteer to be on a working group. And so you can have working groups with strong industry representation, and they may be able to, you know, bring forward a proposal from the working group up to the technical committee. But it's the technical committee that has the final say. And so even if, you know, if industry was able to, you know, gain overrepresentation on a working group and push something up, you know, it would be rejected at the technical committee level because the CGSB process, you know, again, as Nicole and Simon have explained, you know, there's checks and balances to make sure that the technical committee is truly representative of the sector.
Okay, great. Well, I think that we've covered fairly thoroughly some of the different angles, unless I do have another question here. Is there a common template that the working groups and technical committee use to evaluate the proposed changes?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to
yes,
just
we
that? We're
yeah.
Time, but I'd love to hear.
Yes, everything that we do, we have templates, and when working group are meeting, you have the proposed modification, you have the background information, everybody writes comments, and when the working group meets, they make recommendations, and everything is on. And then when it goes up to the technical committee, we have another template specific to the technical committee. It's really organized, and there is, you know, no improvisation on templates, on documents that working groups and technical committee are using.
Nicole, is this something that, like, if I think OCO would love to have a little bit of a flow. We are going to be publishing a blog on the process so that it's a bit more transparent for everyone. But maybe if some of those those templates were clear, and I will happily link to the CGSB policy document as well, so that people can review that if they want. But I'm wondering if some of that information could be published.
I will check. We have built a website where all under the last review, we have all the TC forms. The TC form is really the form the template that we use when we present recommendations at the technical committee, and there were 400 petitions under the last review. We have TC forms and working group documents for each of the 400 petitions. It is archived, it's there, and the conveners really have to follow the procedures. So it's all archived on a website. I will verify if we can give free access, or maybe I can share a folder, like the folder of, I don't know, the greenhouse crops, so you can see what are the templates and how it is filled, how it is built, and it's very standardized.
Okay, great.
It's also worth noting that the standard itself, Section 10 of the Canadian Organic Standard, actually outlines the procedures and criteria and conditions required to amend the permitted substances list, for example. So that's another, source of insight into how it works.
Yes, so there are two forms. I think we mentioned that there are two forms to fill in if you're making a petition. And one of them is about the principles and the other one is about the permitted substances. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is there a consideration for an impact study if major changes are made?
Yes, we have a budget. We call it research or technical expertise or technical support. Oh yes, we need that. But thing is that we are still waiting for the final approval. So we pay consultants to do study impacts on certain petitions that are quite challenging and that could have a major impact. But so we hope to have confirmation of the budget very soon, because to do research, it takes time. Takes more than a couple of days. So as soon as we have confirmation of the budget, there are already 5 or 6 points that we want to have expertise and consultation done on the impact that it would have.
Great. So with that, we're at 1:52. Unless there are any more burning questions, I'd like to thank our panelists and this comment here to thank you for your hard work. And we wouldn't, organic is a lot of it is about the principles and the ethics, and sometimes people feel a little bit like, why does it have to be so bureaucratic and so technical? But without that expertise, we wouldn't have a standard and we wouldn't know what organic meant. And I think the devil's in the details, and it's important to have people like yourselves who know the details. Certainly we rely on you a lot and we get questions all the time. So just to go back quickly to our final points on the presentation. We will be sharing, certainly with the panelists and the participants, we will be sharing the recording, so you can go back to that in the notes. And we may make it public depending on our how everything is recorded and how our panelists feel about it. Certainly we're hoping to make as much transparency around the process as possible. So one more reminder that if you do want to make a petition, the deadline is July 31st. But again, this is just the first stage. It is important to get it in by that timeline to help to decide on the working groups. But OCO will be trying to continually engage with the sector and with our members to make sure that your frustrations or your opinions are shared all the way through the process, your rationale. So again, I'd like to thank you all, Simon, Nicole, and Rob, for participating. Thanks to our staff behind the scenes for helping out, Cecilia especially for putting together the presentation. And if you liked this webinar and you want to get more involved, please consider becoming an OCO member or a member of the Canadian Organic Growers. And please do also consider, if you're interested in a particular webinar, let us know what it is, and we'll try and see if we can make that happen. Again, September 11th is our Queen's Park Day, and we'll have no doubt more discussions about regulations at that time. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll be ending.
Yeah. And I would like to thank Caroline and OCO for doing this. I think it's extremely interesting and important. So I thank you. I congratulate you for your big work.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And we'll be ending
Bye-bye.
the meeting now. Bye.
Bye-bye.